Madam President, I just really want to underscore the point that it is urgent that we take up this omnibus appropriation bill and that we do this in order to have a budget for our country and that we don't threaten another government shutdown. We know how damaging that is to this country. And that we don't have another continuing resolution. Another continuing resolution provides uncertainty to our agencies. They can't do the critical work that they need to do. It establishes the last year's priorities rather than trying to establish the priorities for this year, and represents a failure of the Congress. So I want to start by first thanking and congratulating my colleague from Maryland, Senator Mikulski, for her incredible leadership through this process, working with Senator Shelby and their counterparts in the House of Representatives. This is not easy. We have sharply different views in this Congress, and we've seen over and over again gridlock, where we're unable to make decisions. And I want to congratulate Senator Mikulski for bringing the negotiations of the omnibus to a successful conclusion. And when you look at the work that she did in the appropriations part of this omnibus appropriation bill, I'm very proud. I think we all should be very proud and very supportive of the work that she has done. As I pointed out earlier, if we don't pass an omnibus appropriation bill, we're either going to have a government shutdown or we're going to resort to a short-term continuing resolution. In either case, it is very damaging to our country and to our economy. The omnibus appropriation bill that we have before us allows us to set certain priorities. And I know that Senator Mikulski has gone through many of those priorities. I just want to outline a few. The fact that we give additional resources for missing and exploited children, the fact that we provide law enforcement with rape kits to help in law enforcement against those who have perpetrated violence against women, the fact that we provide an additional $5 billion plus to fight the Ebola crisis globally. This has a direct impact on the world economy, on world health, and directly affects the United States. The appropriations for our Department of Defense to be able to combat the extremist ISIL and its fear that it has invoked, not just in that region, but globally. This omnibus appropriation bill provides the resources in order to carry out these important responsibilities of government. The alternative is a continuing resolution at best. How do you fight a war on a continuing resolution? How do you fight Ebola on a continuing resolution? You don't have those ability to be able to do it. I want to thank Senator Mikulski. She's provided funds in here for our farm service agencies, which is particularly important to keep open the 250 threatened closures of farm services offices. I mention that because in Maryland, these officers are very important to our agricultural community. Maryland farmers, in their conservation efforts to help us on the Chesapeake Bay, they work in conjunction with the service agencies. The closing of these agencies would be devastating. The omnibus provides a modest pay adjustment for our federal workforce. Our federal workforce, which has been asked to do more with less people, more responsibilities. They're on the front lines of public service. This omnibus recognizes their service by giving them a modest adjustment to their pay. The transportation programs, which is critically important for economic growth. I could go over the difference here if we don't get the omnibus. For example, the funds for our transit projects. I know in Maryland, there's $100 million here for the Purple Line in Prince George's County and Montgomery County. For those of us who travel in this region, we know firsthand the gridlock problems on our roads. The only good thing about being in tonight is I don't have to fight the traffic going home to Baltimore. We need the transit funding, and thank you, Senator Mikulski, for providing that. Continuing resolution, we lose it. The funds for the Red Line in Baltimore, lost, that we don't have the an omnibus appropriation bill. There's funds in here for dredging of the Baltimore Harbor. I particularly appreciate the Appropriations Committee continuing the commitment that we made in 2008, the legislation that I authored for the full funding of the federal contribution to the WMATA system. The funds that are here for our contract air traffic control towers. You remember just not too long ago, there was a threatened under the shutdown that we were going to have to close the contract offices that work the air traffic control towers in our smaller airports, including in Maryland. Well, we're protected by the omnibus, so that will occur. Go to a continuing resolution, there's no such protection. The Appalachia Regional Commission gets a bump up in this appropriation bill for good reason. The work they do is critically important to the rural part of Maryland, on the western part. They need that. You go to a continuing resolution, those initiatives are gone. We don't get that. And we could go on and on and on as to what is in this bill. There's a $1.4 billion additional money for the community health centers. Community health centers. Thank you. In Maryland, we've used those funds to expand community health centers, to expand prenatal care, increasing infant survival in our state. We've used it for community mental health services. We've used it for pediatric dental services. And in the omnibus bill, we'll be able to continue to make that progress. If we don't get the omnibus, all bets are off on a continuing resolution. Can't move forward in those programs. I thank you on behalf of the veterans of this country. What you've done on requiring advance funding is that you protected our veterans and the benefits that we promised them, regardless of the problems we have in getting our appropriation bills done. That's the right thing to do. They fought to preserve the liberties of our country. They should at least know that we're going to live up to the commitments that we made to protect our veterans. I also appreciate that in this omnibus you have extended the TAA benefits that would help our workers in transition who otherwise would not be have jobs due to the international trade issues. My colleague Senator Brown's been very instrumental in this. We extend that through FY15. Military construction. Military construction is critically important. We've gone through a BRAC process. We've gone through ways in which we have consolidated our military, but we also have to modernize our facilities. And the military construction budgets, which would come to a standstill if we don't have a budget. In Maryland, we have projects that will move forward in Havre de Grace, Annapolis, Indian Head, Pax River, Fort Meade, and Andrews. All that's very, very important. Money's been provided in this omnibus to help in regards to the problems in Central America. We saw what happened on our borders. I think we all agree we want children to be safe. It must be a horrible choice for a parent to put their child on a transit to come to the United States because of what's happening in their Central America country. We begin in this omnibus bill to say, hey, let's try to work for safer conditions in Central America, which will give us more stability in regards to what's happening on our own borders. That makes sense. That's in there. I also thank Senator Mikulski for an initiative that I requested that deals with Holocaust survivors. For the first time, we have a direct appropriation to help Holocaust survivors. These are individuals that have a great fear of ending up in an institution. You can understand why. So access to governmental services in the community are particularly important. And this omnibus is sensitive to make sure that we provide that. Again, we don't have the omnibus, that initiative is gone. You've protected our Pell Grant recipients so that they can continue to receive their Pell Grants at the current levels. All this is so important in the omnibus if we don't get it. Now, Madam President, there are some things in this omnibus I don't like at all. As I said earlier, this is a compromise. I know that we've seen the bills come over from the House of Representatives. We've seen the anti-environmental, anti-financial consumer protection bills. So many bills have come over. And we know that there were efforts made to add numerous of these policy riders to the appropriation, to the omnibus bill. Unfortunately, some got on. And I certainly understand the political process. I'm not naive to understand that we could win on every issue. But I feel compelled to point out the policy riders that are on this omnibus bill that I hope we will work together to remove the harmful impacts that they could possibly have on policy in this country. On the environmental front, there's a policy rider that restricts EPA's authority to deal with tackle and ammunition as it relates to lead content. That our policy should be based and allow EPA, based upon best science, how they protect public health. I think that's compromised by that rider. There's a rider here that could compromise how the agricultural community works in our clean water bills. All stakeholders have to be in together to deal with clean water. We do that with the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. I think that rider could have some very negative impact. We've heard a lot of talk about the sage grass, which is a species that could become endangered. The Environmental Protection Agency should be able to do what is right in establishing the right conservation efforts, but instead there are restrictions placed on the EPA, and I regret that. I hope we can work around that. The definition of fill in mining regulations that could open up to more mountaintop removal for coal mining. That's the most obscene way to obtain coal. You blow up mountains, pollute streams. There's better ways. We shouldn't put these arbitrary restrictions on the Environmental Protection Agency. There's a provision here that we've heard a lot of comment on the floor dealing on financial consumer protection, which would repeal the Dodd-Frank provision where banks had to push out some of their derivative trading into separate accounts so they weren't subject to the FDIC, the government insurance program. If that provision could be used for risky trading and could result in government bailouts. That's bad. Let's work to make sure that doesn't happen. Let's work together to restore that type of protection in our financial services. The IMF doesn't receive funds under this omnibus bill. I think that's a mistake. I think our responsibilities internationally require us to cooperate in that. There's provisions in here that interfere with the District of Columbia Home Rule. Mr. President, that won't be the first time we've done that, and I regret that. So it's not unusual to see those provisions in an appropriation bill, but it still doesn't make it right. It's not right. There's some missed opportunities here. I'm sorry that we're not participating in the Green Climate Fund. This is an international effort to deal with the realities of climate change. The United States needs to be a leader. We're missing an opportunity by not participating in the Green Climate Fund. I regret that this is an omnibus appropriation bill for all agencies except one, Homeland Security. That's wrong. Homeland Security, our Homeland Security needs the protection of a budget, not a continuing resolution. You know, we may have different views on what we should do in immigration policy, but that shouldn't stop us from allowing those who serve in Homeland Security to have the confidence that we will support their budget for a year and that they can go forward with initiatives. So I regret that that's a missed opportunity that's in the omnibus bill. And lastly, Mr. President, let me mention the two extraneous issues that made their way into the omnibus appropriation bill. That was a mystery, I think, to Senator Mikulski and the others who worked so hard in negotiating back and forth in good faith, only to find that the Rules Committee in the House of Representatives added two extraneous provisions to an omnibus appropriation bill. The process is wrong. They shouldn't do that. That's an abuse of power. They're also, by the way, wrong on the policy. One is a very serious issue. How do we deal with multi-employer plans? I've been working on pension issues ever since I came to the Congress. We have a problem with the multi-employer plans. There's no question about it. But we should have a bill on the floor of the Senate and debate that. We shouldn't be passing a bill that could very well have some very stark consequences on individuals who are currently retired. And that could very easily happen under this provision. The second, which adds new categories of giving in our political system to political party conventions and to their building funds and to recounts. We don't need more money in politics in this country. And we certainly shouldn't be taking up that bill on an omnibus appropriation bill. So, Mr. President, let me conclude my remarks as I began. And that is, to me, this is an easy decision to make. It's an easy decision because the public does not want to see more gridlock in Washington.
They know the House of Representatives have gone home. They know that our leaders have negotiated an omnibus budget for next fiscal year. And they're saying, at long last, can we at least get this done? Or are we going to have another threatened shutdown? Or are we going to put the government on autopilot for a 3-month period? I think we have a responsibility to see issues to conclusion. And on the appropriation issues that are in this bill, we should be very proud to support the work of Senator Mikulski and the entire group that was behind the negotiations of this omnibus bill, Senator Shelby and others. We should support that and recognize that what we need to do next year, Mr. President, and I know my colleague from Maryland has been the champion of this. I've heard her speak so eloquently in our caucus about it on the floor of the Senate. What we need to do is get a budget done in the regular order so the appropriators know what their budget limits are, and they can work on the individual appropriation bills and can bring them to the floor. We can debate them, have amendment votes, and then we won't be as frustrated as we are tonight at the 11th hour dealing with issues for the very first time that we see in the omnibus appropriations bill. And I know that Senator Mikulski has been the great champion of saying, let's get back to regular order. And that means let's bring she did that in her committee. We're not surprised. We saw the work of her committee. It was done very openly. We had a chance for input. And that's why a lot of what's in this omnibus appropriations bill represents the work of each member of this body. But we can do this in a more open and transparent way by considering individual appropriation bills on the floor of the United States Senate, reconciling those differences with the House, and really doing the people's business and not be confronted with another large omnibus appropriation bill. So I encourage my colleagues to support the good work that's been done, and I hope that we can approve this omnibus appropriation bill this evening, well in advance of the Saturday midnight, which will be here sooner than we think, in order to avoid a government shutdown and let the people of this nation know that we're doing their business. So with that, I would yield the floor.